Either you find a job by Monday, Mom, or you can sleep in your car, my daughter said while passing the mashed potatoes like she was discussing the weather. Daniel kept staring at his plate. My grandson, Ethan, froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. And me? I just sat there listening to the grandfather clock in the hallway tick louder than it ever had before. 3 weeks earlier, I had buried my husband of 46 years. 3 weeks since Thomas Whitmore's funeral. 3 weeks since I stood beside a polished oak casket in the cold November rain, while Vanessa cried into expensive tissues and told everyone she would take care of Mom now. Funny how quickly promises change when the casseroles stop arriving and the sympathy cards dry up. The dining room smelled like rosemary chicken and fresh bread, but underneath it all lingered the sharp scent of something colder. Resentment. I looked down at my hands resting quietly in my lap. At 71, they looked thinner than I remembered, the veins more visible. My wedding ring still sat on my finger even though Thomas was gone. I hadn't found the strength to take it off yet. Vanessa sighed dramatically when I didn't answer fast enough. Mom, you can't just sit around grieving forever. Real life doesn't stop because Dad died. Dad. Not even your husband. Just Dad. Like he had become a problem to clean up. I glanced toward the kitchen where the light above the stove still glowed softly. Thomas used to stand there every Sunday night making coffee after dinner, humming old Frank Sinatra songs under his breath while I wrapped leftovers in foil. The silence in that kitchen now felt unnatural, like the house itself knew something was terribly wrong. I already told you. Vanessa continued, sipping wine from my crystal glassware. Daniel and I can't keep carrying this household alone. Property taxes went up. Groceries are expensive. Utilities aren't free. Daniel finally cleared his throat, but never looked at me. Vanessa's just trying to be practical. Practical. That word had become her favorite weapon lately. Practical meant removing my photographs from the hallway because they made the house feel dated. Practical meant moving my sewing machine into the basement because Ethan needed room for a gaming desk. Practical meant speaking about me like I was a piece of furniture nobody wanted, but nobody knew how to throw away politely. Ethan suddenly pushed his chair back slightly. Mom, Grandma just lost Grandpa. Vanessa shot him a warning look sharp enough to silence the room. And Grandma still has bills to pay. I noticed then that she had started calling this place her house. Not our family home. Not your father's house. Hers. The same colonial-style home Thomas and I spent 30 years paying off. The same front porch where Vanessa took prom photos before she became too important to sit beside me at church. I folded my napkin carefully onto the table and finally looked at my daughter. Really looked at her. Her perfect blonde hair. Her polished smile. The impatience hidden beneath her mascara and expensive earrings. Somewhere along the line, grief had turned my daughter into a stranger wearing my child's face. What kind of job do you think I should get? I asked quietly. Vanessa blinked, almost surprised I'd spoken at all. I don't know. Walmart greeter. Receptionist. Something simple. Something simple. As if 40 years spent raising her, supporting Thomas, balancing every grocery budget, every school fundraiser, every family emergency meant nothing now. Outside, icy rain tapped against the dining room windows. Ethan stared down at the tablecloth, embarrassed for all of us. Daniel reached for more wine. And I realized something in that moment that chilled me far more than the weather outside. My daughter was no longer waiting for me to heal. She was waiting for me to disappear. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above our bed, listening to the old house settle around me. Every creak sounded unfamiliar now. Thomas used to joke that this house had moods like a person. In winter it groaned. In summer it sighed. On stormy nights like this one, it whispered. I used to find comfort in those sounds. Now they only reminded me that half the soul of this house was gone. The empty side of the bed beside me looked too large. Thomas had always slept close to the edge because he said I liked having space. His reading glasses still rested on the nightstand beside an unfinished mystery novel with a bookmark halfway through chapter 12. I had not touched it since the morning the paramedics wheeled him out of our front door. The digital clock beside the lamp read 2:14 a.m. I could hear faint laughter downstairs. Vanessa was still awake, probably watching television with Daniel. A month ago, she used to lower her voice when passing our bedroom door. Now she walked through the house like she owned every square foot of it. I finally pulled myself out of bed and wrapped my old wool cardigan tighter around my shoulders before heading downstairs for water. The kitchen light was still on. Dirty wine glasses sat in the sink beside a half-eaten cheesecake from dinner. Vanessa hated leaving dishes overnight when I was the one cleaning them. Somehow that rule no longer applied to her. I reached for a glass when I noticed papers spread across the dining room table. Mortgage statements, insurance forms, property tax estimates. Vanessa's handwriting covered several sticky notes attached to the pages. Sell before spring. Senior living options. Market value estimate. My chest tightened. I stepped closer. One brochure showed smiling gray-haired couples sitting beside a fountain outside a retirement complex 40 miles away. Comfortable assisted living for independent seniors. Independent. That word sat there like an insult. I had driven myself to church 2 weeks earlier. I still balanced my own checkbook. I still baked Ethan's favorite apple pie from scratch every Thanksgiving. But to Vanessa, 71 meant obsolete. I quietly returned everything exactly how I found it. Then I stood there staring at the dining room walls covered with family photographs. Thomas holding Vanessa on his shoulders at Disney World. Ethan in a Little League uniform grinning with missing front teeth. Christmas mornings. Graduation ceremonies. Family vacations at Lake Erie. So many memories framed neatly in oak and silver. Yet suddenly all of them felt staged somehow, like evidence from a life that no longer existed. The next morning the rain had stopped, leaving the neighborhood wrapped in cold gray fog. I woke early out of habit and started coffee before anyone else came downstairs. Thomas always said mornings belonged to me. I liked the quiet, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the smell of coffee filling the kitchen before daylight fully arrived. For a few precious minutes, I could almost pretend life was normal. Then Vanessa walked in wearing silk pajamas and scrolling through her phone without even saying good morning. She opened the refrigerator, frowned, and pulled out the orange juice carton. Mom, this expired yesterday. I stared at the date. 1 day? It is probably still fine, I said softly. She tossed it directly into the trash. That mentality is exactly why expenses pile up. I watched the carton disappear beneath coffee grounds and paper towels. $3.89 wasted because my daughter wanted to make a point. Daniel wandered in moments later adjusting his tie for work. Morning, he muttered before kissing Vanessa's cheek. He did not look at me. Not really. People think cruelty always arrives loudly. Sometimes it arrives through avoidance, through silence, through a son-in-law suddenly pretending not to notice your hands shaking while pouring coffee. Ethan came downstairs last, backpack slung over one shoulder. Morning, Grandma, he said immediately, walking over to hug me. Vanessa glanced up from her phone. Shoes, she snapped. Do not walk on the clean floor with wet sneakers. Ethan rolled his eyes slightly but obeyed. Before leaving for school, he paused beside me while Vanessa answered a phone call in the hallway. Grandma, he whispered carefully, are you okay? Such a small question. For simple words. Yet hearing genuine concern in that house nearly broke me. I forced a smile and touched his cheek gently. I am fine, sweetheart. But as I watched him leave through the front door into the cold Pennsylvania morning, I realized something painful. The only person still seeing me as family was 16 years old. 2 days later, I found Thomas's winter coat hanging exactly where he left it in the hallway closet. The dark brown wool still carried the faint scent of cedarwood aftershave and cold December air. I stood there longer than I should have, running my fingers across the sleeve while the house remained quiet around me. Vanessa had taken Ethan shopping for new basketball shoes, and Daniel was at work. For the first time in weeks, the silence felt peaceful instead of hostile. I do not know what made me check the coat pockets. Maybe grief makes people search for traces of the dead anywhere they can find them. An old receipt, a grocery list, a forgotten note, something small enough to prove they were really here. The first pocket held peppermints and loose change. The second held folded tissues and a hardware store receipt from October. But inside the inner breast pocket, my fingers brushed against paper thicker than the rest. I slowly pulled out a long white envelope with my name written across the front in Thomas's careful handwriting. Margaret. Just that. No flourish. No explanation. My heart started beating harder before I even opened it. I carried the envelope to the kitchen table and sat beneath the same hanging light fixture where we had eaten dinner together for 30 years. Outside, bare tree branches swayed against a pale gray sky. Pennsylvania winters always made the world feel quieter somehow. I slid one finger carefully beneath the seal. Inside was a small brass key taped to a business card. Whitmore and Associates Private Trust Division. My stomach tightened instantly. Thomas never mentioned any trust division to me. Beneath the card sat a single handwritten note. If you are reading this, sweetheart, then I am probably no longer there to protect you the way I promised I always would. I had to stop reading for a moment because tears blurred the page almost immediately. Even dead, Thomas still sounded like the man who warmed my side of the bed with a heating pad before snowstorms because my arthritis bothered me in winter. I pressed my fingers against my lips before continuing. There are things I chose not to discuss while I was alive because I hoped our family would remain a family after I was gone. But if something feels wrong, trust yourself. You have always been stronger than you realize. Inside, the downtown office safe deposit box is everything you need. Do not tell Vanessa until you understand it all first. I read that last sentence 3 times. Do not tell Vanessa. Not Daniel. Not Ethan. Vanessa specifically. A cold heaviness settled into my chest. Suddenly, every strange moment over the past few weeks replayed itself differently in my mind. Vanessa rushing to handle funeral paperwork before I could even process Thomas's death. Vanessa insisting she help organize our financial files. Vanessa reminding me repeatedly that Dad did not leave much liquid cash. At the time I believed she was helping. Now I wondered what exactly she had been looking for. I carefully folded the letter just as I heard the garage door opening. Voices drifted inside. Vanessa laughing. Ethan asking if they could stop for burgers next time. I slipped the envelope back into Thomas's coat pocket moments before Vanessa entered the kitchen carrying shopping bags. Mom, can you move your sewing basket from the den later? She asked casually while setting bags on the counter. Daniel and I are thinking of turning that room into a home office. Your sewing basket, not your room. Not your husband's study where Thomas spent every evening reading history books beside the fireplace. Just another space they were already redesigning in their heads. I will think about it, I answered quietly. Vanessa paused slightly, probably surprised I had not immediately agreed. Then she smiled that polished smile she used whenever she wanted to appear patient in front of Ethan. Well, we all have to make adjustments now. Adjustments. Another one of her favorite words. That evening I waited until everyone was asleep before retrieving the envelope again. I sat alone in bed beneath the soft yellow glow of my bedside lamp, while snow began falling outside the windows. Tiny white flakes drifted across the dark yard where Thomas used to hang Christmas lights every year without fail. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the brass key over in my palm. For the first time since the funeral, my grief shifted into something else. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter. Awareness. Thomas had known something before. He died. Maybe not everything, but enough to leave me a path. And suddenly I realized I was not the only person in that house keeping secrets. The following morning, Vanessa announced she was hosting brunch for her friends on Saturday and wanted the house looking less cluttered. She said it while standing in the kitchen wearing workout clothes that probably cost more than my first monthly paycheck back in 1972. Especially the den, she added, stirring almond milk into her coffee. People barely use formal sitting rooms anymore. People. Such a convenient word when you are trying to erase someone without saying it directly. I stood quietly at the sink drying dishes while snow drifted softly outside the windows. The den she wanted to redesign had once been Thomas's favorite room in the house. He painted the walls himself a deep forest green one summer, while Vanessa complained about the smell the entire weekend. Every bookshelf in that room held pieces of our life together. Photo albums, travel souvenirs, old records, the framed newspaper clipping from the year Thomas coached Ethan's Little League team to a county championship. But to Vanessa, memories were clutter if they did not match her vision board. I can move some things later, I answered carefully. Vanessa nodded absently while typing on her phone. Perfect. Oh, and one more thing. I talked to a realtor yesterday. My hand stopped moving against the dish towel. A realtor? Just to explore options, she said quickly. This market is incredible right now. Houses in this neighborhood are selling within days. I turned slowly toward her. This house is not for sale. Vanessa let out a soft laugh like I had misunderstood something obvious. Mom, eventually it will have to be. It is way too much house for one person. One person. Not family. Not us. Just one person. Daniel walked into the kitchen seconds later, tension already visible in his face. He grabbed coffee without speaking. Vanessa glanced toward him. Tell her what the realtor said. Daniel hesitated. The property value went up almost 30% since last year. I waited for him to say something else. Something human. Instead, he stared into his coffee mug like the steam might rescue him from the conversation. Thomas built this house for our family, I said quietly. And families evolve, Vanessa replied immediately. You cannot expect everything to stay frozen forever. Frozen. Strange choice of words considering I felt exactly that inside lately. Like grief had covered every part of my life in ice. Later that afternoon, I went upstairs to look through old photo boxes in the attic. I told Vanessa I was organizing. In truth, I needed to remember who we used to be before everything became transactional. Dust floated through thin beams of winter sunlight as I opened faded cardboard boxes labeled Christmas and vacations and Vanessa's school years in Thomas's block handwriting. I found a photograph from 1989 of Vanessa sitting on Thomas's shoulders at the county fair, both of them smiling beneath strings of carnival lights. Another showed 12-year-old Vanessa asleep against my lap during a road trip to Virginia Beach while I held a juice box in one hand and a folded highway map in the other. Back then, she used to slip handwritten Mother's Day cards beneath my bedroom door before sunrise because she could never wait until breakfast. One year she wrote, "You are my safe place forever." I sat there in the attic holding that card while tears blurred the ink. Somewhere between those years and now, my daughter had learned to measure love in property values and monthly expenses. And somehow I had missed the exact moment it happened. That evening, Ethan knocked softly on my bedroom door after dinner. "Grandma," he asked carefully, "can I come in?" I quickly tucked Thomas's envelope beneath a sweater inside my dresser drawer before answering yes. Ethan stepped inside holding a plate with 2 chocolate chip cookies wrapped in napkins. I saved these before Mom gave the rest to her brunch guests. I smiled despite myself. "Thank you, sweetheart." He sat at the edge of my chair awkwardly, tall and skinny in a gray hoodie, still growing into his hands and feet. "Grandma," he said after a moment, lowering his voice, "are you really going to move out?" The question settled heavily between us. I studied his face carefully. He looked so much like Thomas around the eyes that sometimes it startled me. "Why would you ask that?" Ethan swallowed hard. "Because I heard Mom talking on the phone last night. She said once the house sells, everything will finally be easier." Easier? I looked past Ethan toward the snow-covered backyard where Thomas once built Vanessa a wooden swing set by hand. My daughter was already planning a future that no longer included me in it. But for the first time since the funeral, fear no longer sat alone inside my chest. Something else had begun growing beside it. Patience. 3 mornings later, I left the house before sunrise for the first time since Thomas's funeral. The air outside carried that sharp Pennsylvania cold that burns your lungs a little when you breathe too deeply. Frost covered the Whitmore mailbox at the end of the driveway, and the neighborhood sat quiet beneath pale winter light. I told Vanessa I had a doctor appointment. She barely looked up from her phone when I left. The brass key rested heavily inside my coat pocket the entire drive downtown. Whitmore and Associates occupied the 4th floor of an old brick building near the courthouse, the kind with marble floors and brass railings polished by decades of footsteps. Thomas used to bring me there once a year for tax meetings. Back then I never paid attention to the details because he always handled everything. I trusted him completely. Now I wished I had listened more carefully. A silver-haired receptionist looked up as I entered the office. "Mrs. Whitmore?" she asked immediately, almost as if she had been expecting me. I nodded slowly. "My husband left me this." I placed the business card in brass, key gently on the desk. Her expression softened the moment she saw Thomas's handwriting on the envelope. "Of course, Mr. Whitmore made arrangements for this situation." Situation. Such a calm word for the feeling of watching your family quietly dissolve around you. She escorted me into a private office where a man in his 60s stood as soon as I entered. "Margaret," he said warmly, extending his hand. "I am Richard Bennett. Thomas and I worked together for nearly 20 years. His voice alone nearly unraveled me. It sounded normal, respectful, human, not careful or impatient the way everyone sounded around me lately. Richard waited until I sat before sliding a thick folder across the desk. "Your husband established a family trust 11 years ago." I stared at him silently. 11 years. Long before Vanessa became obsessed with property values and renovations. Long before Thomas got sick. He transferred ownership of the house into the trust shortly after retirement. Richard continued carefully. Legally, the property belongs entirely to you for the duration of your lifetime. My fingers tightened around the edge of the folder. Vanessa believes the house belongs to her father's estate. Richard exchanged a brief glance with the receptionist before speaking again. Thomas anticipated there might be misunderstandings after his passing. That is why he structured everything this way. Structured everything. I slowly opened the folder. Inside sat copies of legal documents, bank statements, insurance policies, and investment accounts I had never seen before. The numbers blurred together at first. Then one figure finally settled clearly into focus. My breath caught. Thomas had quietly secured enough savings to support me comfortably for the rest of my life. Not extravagantly, but safely, securely. There would be no job at Walmart, no senior apartment, no dependence on Vanessa's approval to survive. Why did he never tell me? I whispered. Richard's expression gentled. Because he hoped he would outlive the need for it. For several seconds, the only sound in the office came from the ticking wall clock behind me. I thought about Thomas sitting beside me every evening pretending to watch television while secretly protecting me in ways I never realized. My chest ached with equal parts grief and gratitude. Richard cleared his throat softly. There is one more thing you should know. He slid another document across the desk. Your daughter contacted our office 2 weeks after the funeral. My stomach tightened immediately. What did she want? Access, he answered carefully. She requested details regarding property transfers and estate liquidation. Timelines. Liquidation. The word landed cold inside me. Not memories. Not family history. Liquidation. Did you tell her anything? Richard adjusted his glasses. Absolutely not. Thomas left very specific instructions regarding confidentiality. I leaned back slowly in the leather chair, suddenly remembering every rushed conversation Vanessa initiated after the funeral. Every suggestion about selling. Every casual remark about expenses. She had not been grieving. She had been calculating. Outside the office windows, snow drifted steadily across downtown streets, while people hurried beneath scarves and heavy coats. Life continuing normally while mine rearranged itself piece by piece. Richard finally folded his hands together. Margaret, your husband loved you very much. He wanted to make certain no one could force you out of your home. Force you out. Hearing someone say it aloud transformed everything inside me. For weeks I had felt like a burden apologizing for existing in my own house. But sitting there in that quiet office with Thomas's careful planning spread across the desk, I understood something clearly for the first time since his death. I was not powerless. I had simply been grieving too deeply to notice the difference. When I returned home that afternoon, Vanessa was standing in the foyer, holding a tape measure while speaking with someone on speakerphone. The den is about 14 by 16, she said casually. If we remove the built-in shelves, we can open the whole space up. She stopped mid-sentence when she saw me remove my gloves by the front door. Oh, you are back early. Her tone carried mild disappointment, as if my own schedule inconvenienced her plans. My appointment finished sooner than expected, I replied calmly. For the first time in weeks, I did not feel small standing in my own house. Grief still sat heavy inside me, but underneath it now rested something steadier. Knowledge. Vanessa returned to her phone call immediately. I will text you pictures later, she said before hanging up. Then she smiled too brightly. I was just talking to a designer friend. Designer friend. Another stranger invited to redesign pieces of my life. Without asking permission, I hung my coat carefully beside Thomas's old winter jacket and noticed something strange immediately. The pocket where I always kept the envelope sat slightly folded inward. Someone had touched it. The realization came quietly but sharply. Vanessa had been searching through Thomas's things. I said nothing. Instead, I walked toward the kitchen and began making tea exactly as I always had. Water. Kettle. Earl Grey. 2 spoonfuls of honey. Small routines suddenly felt important now, like invisible reminders that I still belonged here, no matter how much Vanessa tried reshaping the house around herself. A few minutes later, Daniel entered through the garage carrying grocery bags. Hey, Margaret, he said automatically before setting bags on the counter. He looked exhausted lately. Dark circles beneath his eyes. Shoulders permanently tense. Living beside Vanessa's constant ambition seemed to drain everyone around her eventually. How was your appointment? He asked politely. I stirred my tea slowly. Informative. He nodded awkwardly, probably sensing something different in my voice without understanding what. Vanessa walked into the kitchen moments later holding paint samples. Daniel, tell your mother which color works better for the den. Your mother. Not mom anymore. Not Margaret. Just your mother. A responsibility being transferred between people. Daniel glanced nervously between the paint cards. Maybe the lighter one. Vanessa held up a pale gray sample beside the wall. See? Modern. Clean. Bright. I looked around the kitchen while she spoke. The same kitchen Thomas and I renovated together after saving for 3 years. He installed every cabinet himself, while Vanessa complained during college visits that the house looked too traditional. Yet suddenly she spoke about changing everything like history itself was an inconvenience. I actually like the den exactly the way it is, I said softly before sipping my tea. Silence settled instantly across the kitchen. Vanessa lowered the paint samples slowly. Well, she said carefully, you might not be here forever, Mom. Such a simple sentence. Calm, almost gentle, yet it landed harder than all her earlier insults combined. Daniel immediately shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa, he warned quietly. But she continued anyway. I just think everyone needs to be realistic. Ethan graduates in 2 years. We need more functional space if we are staying long-term. Staying long-term. There it was. Not grief. Not temporary support after Thomas died. A plan. I met her eyes steadily for the first time since the funeral. And who decided this was your house to stay in? Vanessa blinked slightly, clearly surprised by the question. Dad would have wanted us here. Thomas wanted his family together, I answered calmly. There is a difference. Daniel suddenly busied himself unpacking groceries with intense concentration, avoiding eye contact completely. Vanessa crossed her arms. Mom, nobody is trying to hurt you. Hurt. Interesting choice of words from someone measuring my rooms for renovations before my husband's headstone was even finished. I set my teacup gently into the sink. Good, I replied quietly. Because I am beginning to notice when people try. For several seconds nobody spoke. The refrigerator hummed softly behind us while snow continued falling outside the windows. Then Ethan burst through the back door carrying his basketball shoes and immediately sensed the tension hanging in the kitchen. What happened? He asked carefully. Nothing, Vanessa answered too quickly. But Ethan looked directly at me instead. And for the first time since Thomas died, I did not force a reassuring smile to make everyone else comfortable. That evening, after dinner, I walked alone through every room in the house while the others watched television downstairs. The hallway photographs. The worn staircase railing polished smooth by decades of hands. The grandfather clock Thomas inherited from his father. Everywhere I looked, I no longer saw a widow waiting to be displaced. I saw evidence. Proof of a life built carefully over 46 years. And downstairs, sitting beneath my roof while discussing paint colors and resale values, my daughter still believed I was too broken to fight for it. The next week, Vanessa transformed into the kindest version of herself I had seen in months. That alone told me something was coming. She started bringing me coffee in the mornings again, asked if I needed anything from the grocery store, even complimented my sweater one afternoon while folding laundry in the kitchen. Kindness from Vanessa always arrived with calculation attached to it somewhere underneath. On Thursday evening, she suggested we all have dinner together at the dining room table, like a real family again. Daniel looked relieved by the idea. Ethan looked suspicious. I simply nodded and helped set the table, using the same cream-colored plates Thomas bought for our 25th anniversary. Vanessa made pot roast with carrots and red potatoes, one of Thomas's favorite meals. The smell alone nearly hurt. During dinner, she laughed more loudly than usual and touched Daniel's arm constantly while speaking. Every movement felt rehearsed somehow, like she was performing harmony instead of living it. Halfway through dessert, she finally leaned back in her chair and smiled at me warmly. Mom, I have exciting news. There it was. I folded my napkin carefully and waited. A realtor friend of mine found the perfect condo community for you. Ethan immediately stopped eating. Daniel looked down at his plate. Vanessa continued before anyone could interrupt. It is beautiful, really. Gated community. Security. Gardening clubs. They even have yoga classes for seniors. Seniors. Again that word. Always delivered like a diagnosis instead of a stage of life. I am not looking for a condo, I answered calmly. Vanessa's smile tightened only slightly. Well, not yet. But we should think ahead responsibly. Responsibly. Another polished little weapon. She reached beside her chair and pulled out a glossy brochure filled with photographs of smiling gray-haired couples walking beside fountains and flower gardens. Everything looked painfully artificial, like happiness designed by committee. She slid the brochure toward me across the table. This one is only 20 minutes away. And if we sell this house in spring, property values are high enough that everybody benefits. Everybody. Such a convenient word when one person intends to benefit most. Ethan suddenly pushed his chair back. Why do you keep talking like Grandma is leaving? Vanessa exhaled sharply. Ethan, adults are having a practical conversation. No, he replied quietly. You are. The room fell silent. Daniel finally looked up. Buddy, your mother is just trying to plan ahead. Ethan stared directly at him. Grandpa died 1 month ago. Nobody answered. Outside, freezing rain tapped softly against the dining room windows while the grandfather clock ticked steadily in the hallway. I looked around the table at the faces of my family and realized something strange. I no longer felt desperate for their approval. Grief had exhausted that part of me already. Vanessa leaned forward again, softening her voice carefully. Mom, this house is a lot for one person. Maintenance alone is expensive. The house is paid off, I replied quietly. Her expression flickered for half a second before recovering. Tiny, almost invisible, but I noticed it. Daniel noticed it too. Utilities, taxes, repairs. Vanessa continued quickly. You should not have to carry all that stress alone. I reached for my teacup slowly. Who said I was carrying anything alone? Another silence. This one colder. Vanessa studied me more carefully now, like she was finally sensing something had shifted beneath the surface. Mom, she said cautiously, did you meet with somebody downtown last week? There it was. My pulse remained perfectly steady. Why would you ask that? I saw a parking receipt in your coat pocket. She smiled lightly after saying it, but the meaning underneath sat ugly and clear. She had been searching through my belongings again. Ethan looked disturbed immediately. Mom, that is weird. I was putting laundry away. Vanessa snapped too quickly. Daniel rubbed his forehead tiredly. Can we please not fight tonight? Fight. Interesting word considering I had barely spoken. I looked directly at Vanessa for several long seconds. Then I smiled softly. Thomas always believed privacy mattered in a family. Her jaw tightened slightly at the mention of his name. I could almost see the calculations moving behind her eyes now. Wondering what I knew. Wondering what Thomas left behind. Wondering whether her timeline was collapsing. Later that night, I passed by the den and noticed Vanessa standing alone beside Thomas's old bookshelf, holding one of his leather-bound journals. She quickly shoved it back into place when she saw me. Just dusting, she said. Dusting at 10:30 at night. I nodded calmly and continued upstairs without another word. But as I climbed the staircase beneath the soft yellow hallway lights, one truth settled fully into place inside me at last. Vanessa was no longer confident. She was nervous. And nervous people make mistakes. Saturday evening arrived wrapped in freezing rain and low gray clouds that made the entire neighborhood feel dim before sunset even began. Vanessa spent the entire afternoon preparing dinner with nervous energy disguised as perfectionism. She polished silverware twice, rearranged candles 3 separate times, changed outfits before finally settling on a cream-colored sweater dress that looked expensive without appearing obvious about it. Daniel hovered quietly behind her all day carrying serving trays and opening wine bottles, while Ethan stayed mostly upstairs pretending to study. Around 5:30, Vanessa finally announced, "Everyone please be downstairs by 6. We are having an important family dinner." Important family dinner. Those words alone almost made me smile. I wore the dark blue cashmere sweater Thomas bought me during our anniversary trip to Vermont 6 years earlier. Vanessa noticed it immediately when I entered the dining room. You look dressed up, she said carefully. I felt like it, I answered softly. For a brief second, her expression shifted into something uncertain before she quickly smiled again. The dining room looked beautiful in the warm glow of candlelight. The mahogany table Thomas inherited from his parents reflected crystal glasses and polished serving dishes exactly the way it had during decades of Christmas dinners and birthday celebrations. Yet beneath the soft lighting sat tension thick enough to taste. Vanessa served roast chicken while speaking too brightly about property listings she had recently toured online. You would not believe how much people are paying for houses in this zip code right now. she said while pouring wine into Daniel's glass. Daniel barely responded. Ethan kept glancing at me quietly from across the table. I noticed he had inherited Thomas's habit of studying people before speaking. Halfway through dinner, the doorbell rang. Vanessa frowned immediately. "Are we expecting someone?" Daniel asked. "No," she answered sharply. I folded my napkin calmly onto my lap. "I invited someone." Every sound in the room seemed to stop at once. Vanessa set down the wine bottle slowly. "You invited someone?" Before I could answer, Richard Bennett stepped into the dining room behind me carrying a leather portfolio beneath his arm. Snowflakes still clung to the shoulders of his dark wool coat. Vanessa's face lost color immediately. Daniel straightened in confusion. Ethan looked between all of us silently. "Good evening," Richard said politely. "I apologize for interrupting dinner." Vanessa recovered first. "I think there must be some misunderstanding," she said tightly. "This is a private family evening." Richard gave a small professional smile. "Actually, Mrs. Reed, this concerns the Whitmore Family Trust." Silence crashed across the room. I watched Vanessa's fingers tighten around the stem of her wine glass. Daniel looked completely lost. "Mom," he said slowly, "what is he talking about?" I turned toward my son-in-law calmly. "Your father-in-law made legal arrangements years ago that I only recently became aware of." Vanessa stood abruptly. "What arrangements?" Her voice came out sharper now. Nervous. Richard opened the leather portfolio carefully and removed several documents. "Thomas Whitmore transferred ownership of this property into a protected trust 11 years ago," he explained evenly. "Margaret Whitmore is sole lifetime beneficiary and legal residential holder of the estate." Vanessa stared at him blankly. "No, that is impossible," Richard continued without reacting. "Additionally, all major financial assets connected to the property remain under Mrs. Whitmore's authority exclusively." Daniel finally looked at Vanessa. "You told me the house was part of your dad's estate." Vanessa's breathing visibly changed. "That is what I thought. But nobody at the table believed that anymore." Ethan slowly lowered his fork onto the plate without making a sound. I sat quietly beneath the chandelier, watching years of entitlement unravel across my daughter's face. "There is one more matter," Richard added calmly. "Mr. Whitmore included explicit legal protections preventing any forced relocation or unauthorized sale attempt involving Mrs. Whitmore's residence." Forced relocation. Such formal words for what Vanessa had spent weeks trying to do politely. Vanessa suddenly looked toward me with something dangerously close to panic. "Mom, why would you do this in front of everyone?" I held her gaze steadily. "Thomas did this." I simply stopped pretending not to see it. Daniel leaned back heavily in his chair, staring at his untouched wine glass like a man realizing he no longer recognized his own home. Outside, freezing rain struck softly against the windows while the grandfather clock continued ticking in the hallway exactly as it always had. Steady, unbothered, familiar. Ethan looked at me then with quiet understanding settling behind his eyes for the first time in weeks. And sitting there at the head of the table inside the house Thomas built with his own hands, I finally understood something clearly myself. Silence only looks like weakness to people who have never had to survive anything. After Richard Bennett left that night, nobody moved for several seconds. The candles continued flickering softly down the center of the dining room table, while dinner plates sat half untouched beneath the warm chandelier light. Vanessa remained standing beside her chair, gripping the backrest so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. Daniel still stared downward in stunned silence. Ethan looked at me differently now. Not with pity, with understanding. I rose slowly from my chair and began collecting plates one by one exactly the way I had after thousands of family dinners before this one. The ordinary rhythm of stacking dishes suddenly felt strangely peaceful. Vanessa finally found her voice as I carried plates toward the kitchen sink. "You embarrassed me," she said quietly behind me. I turned on warm water and rinsed gravy from a serving spoon before answering. "No, Vanessa, the truth embarrassed you." The kitchen fell silent again except for running water and the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Daniel entered a moment later looking older somehow. Exhaustion sat heavily across his face. "Margaret," he said carefully, "I did not know about any of this." I believed him. Daniel's greatest flaw had never been cruelty. It was weakness. He spent years avoiding conflict until avoidance itself became a form of betrayal. I dried my hands slowly with a dish towel before looking at him. Thomas knew the difference between protecting people and controlling them. Daniel lowered his eyes immediately. Upstairs, a bedroom door closed softly. Vanessa had retreated without another word. For the first time in weeks, the house felt quiet in a different way. Not tense. Settled. As though something hidden beneath the surface had finally broken open completely. The following morning, snow covered the neighborhood in thick white silence. I woke before sunrise and walked downstairs wearing my robe and slippers, expecting the usual sound of Vanessa's coffee machine already running. Instead, the kitchen sat empty. A single note rested beside the fruit bowl in Daniel's handwriting. Took Vanessa to her sister's for a few days. We need space. Daniel. I read the note twice before folding it neatly beside the sugar jar. No apology. No explanation. Just space. Funny how quickly people need distance once manipulation stops working. Ethan came downstairs 20 minutes later, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Did Mom leave? He asked immediately. I nodded once. He looked relieved before quickly hiding it. Can I still stay here? The question pierced me more deeply than he realized. This child had spent weeks trapped between loyalty and truth. Of course you can, I answered softly. He exhaled quietly and opened the refrigerator. Grandma. Yes. He hesitated for a moment before speaking again. Grandpa knew what she was like, did not he? I looked out the kitchen window at snow resting across Thomas's rose bushes in the backyard. I think your grandfather hoped people would choose kindness on their own, I said carefully. But he believed in preparation too. Ethan nodded slowly, like he understood more than someone his age should have to. Over the next several days, the house transformed gradually back into something recognizable. Not perfect. Grief still lingered in every room. Thomas was still gone. Nothing could change that emptiness. But the tension that had wrapped around the house since the funeral finally began lifting. I moved Thomas's reading chair back beside the fireplace after Vanessa had tried relocating it upstairs. I placed family photographs back where they belonged. Opened curtains she kept closed because she said sunlight faded furniture. Little by little, the house breathed again. 3 days later, Vanessa returned alone to collect clothing and personal items while I sat quietly in the den reading one of Thomas's old history books. She paused in the doorway, holding car keys tightly between manicured fingers. For the first time in weeks, she looked uncertain instead of confident. Smaller somehow. Mom, she began softly. I never wanted things to happen like this. I closed the book carefully in my lap. No, I answered calmly. You just wanted the house. Her eyes filled instantly with wounded frustration. That is not fair. Neither is telling your widowed mother to find a job or sleep in her car. The words settled heavily between us. Vanessa looked away first. After a long silence, she whispered, I thought you needed help. I studied my daughter quietly then. Really studied her. The expensive coat. The restless ambition. The fear hidden beneath perfectionism. Somewhere over the years, she had confused control with security and money with stability. And now she stood in the middle of consequences she never believed would arrive. Thomas spent 46 years building this family, I said softly. You almost destroyed it in less than a month. Vanessa picked up her overnight bag without another word. At the front door, she hesitated briefly before leaving. But she did not apologize. Some people never do. That evening, Ethan and I sat together in the den while snow fell softly outside. And Frank Sinatra played quietly from Thomas's old record player. The same record Thomas used every Christmas while hanging lights around the porch. Ethan leaned back against the couch and smiled faintly. Grandpa was right about you, he said. I looked toward the fireplace where warm light flickered gently across family photographs and old hardwood floors polished by decades of ordinary life. Then I wrapped my cardigan tighter around my shoulders and allowed myself the smallest smile. People often mistake silence for weakness. Thomas never did.